neighbors start cutting wood and my pepper goes over. Welcome to today's Clean Call. I'm Don Haas, the Director of Teacher Programming at the Paleontological Research Institution and a member of the Clean Leadership Board, and your facilitator for today. And today's topic is an informal discussion about COP26, and we'll start with any announcements. Any announcements? And Gina's got a hand up.
I just wanted to say that we're in the middle of our webinar series. We have another webinar coming up tomorrow at 6 Eastern, 4 Mountain, talking about humans as agents of change within Earth's climate system. I'll put the link to that in the chat. But we've just been promoting those webinars.
Great. And Katie's got a hand up, or had a hand up.
Mine was the same announcement as Gina, so I put it back down.
Okay. And Jim has a hand up.
Yeah, I just seen very nice developments going on in the European Union on education on climate. I'll put a couple links in the chat about that. Just ways to stay in touch, sometimes more directly with programs. It's going to be interesting too of seeing now that the Girl Scouts are nationally coming on board on climate action quite a bit, to see how the Scouts relate to each other internationally. By the way, one of the things that on the Girl Scouts nationally that made them so taking climate change so seriously and basically helping to fund the pilot program in Northern California is the #1 badge, the #1 interest of Girl Scouts is climate action. They have seen it across the board. Girl Scouts want to do something on climate change. That's the subject they have. And the national office is saying, okay, we better listen to that. Thank you.
And didn't they just get a huge endowment from the woman I'm drawing a blank on the name of, $84 million gift to the Girl Scouts of the U.S.?
Mackenzie Scott, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's encouraging. And my announcement is, if you're interested in joining us on Thursday night at 7 o'clock, our Science in the Virtual Pub this week is a panel of EV drivers, and I have too many tabs open, so I can't find the link, but I'll put it in the chat in a minute. But 7 o'clock Eastern time, Thursday night, just kind of a nuts and bolts session. And I actually wouldn't mind one more panelist, somebody who doesn't either drive a Kia Niro as I do, which is the same thing as a Hyundai Kona or a Tesla, because those are already represented, and I'd love to have another vehicle. We've also got an electric motorcyclist on the panel, and if you've got an EV that's not one of those that's that you've had through a winter, I would love to add one more panelist, or if you know somebody who would be good, it'd be great too. Other announcements. Frank, go ahead.
So Donna can't help you out. We got a Kia Niro. Anyway, just a reminder here, and I put it in the chat. The portal as far as remote engagement with COP26, connecting to COP20. Now, Don, you got me saying it. COP27. Anyway, connecting to COP27, there's the link for it. And I put it in for another reason, which is that if any of you bump into links to live sessions or recorded sessions or useful background information, please send that over to me so I can add it into that. And also, one other thing Well, actually, Eric, you and I could talk sometime offline because I know you're going to 27. Yes.
May not be now, Frank. It may not have all kind of come together. So yeah, so
That's too
yeah,
bad.
been
Okay.
working on a project. I'll share that with the group, but yeah, may not be going.
Okay. Okay. Well, enough said about that then. Okay, I'm done.
Other announcements? Did I lose you all? Okay, well, why don't we, here is the link, I think. Yeah, there's the link for Science and Virtual Hub. And I'll also note that our November 2nd Thursday, I think it's the 8th session, is with Adam Smith, who is the climatologist behind NOAA's $1 billion disasters page, and he'll be talking about $1 billion disasters in the US. So folks might be interested in that too. But now, unless there are other announcements, we'll talk COP27. I will get my digit right. And so somebody want to kick us off? I don't think I'm going to manage getting there, but interested in helping people know what's going on.
I could share the project I've been working on. So I was hoping to go, but I think for numerous reasons may not. Just sort of some logistical stuff, and I'm kind of now I'm full-time plus working, so it's a number of things. But the project we've been working on is connecting with a group called Future Food Institute in Italy, and they've been doing a series of live Instagram interviews. So we've been partnering my group called Community Resources for Science. So they've been these 15-minute interviews. We just did one this morning, actually prior to the call, and they've been with different folks. The Future Foods is based in Italy, and they're interested in bringing the idea of nutrition and food security and agricultural systems to COP. Their feeling is it's been kind of underrepresented as something that's important to talk about. Sort of a base human need is to eat and to eat healthy food and have access to food. So we've been doing these interviews. The one this morning was with a fellow from Bangladesh, just talking about them being a very low sea level rise is a huge issue for them, and food security is a huge issue for Bangladesh. So he was speaking to that, and the interviews have been paired with a group called Climate Shapers, which are young teen or low 20s Italian young people that do the interviews with the folks that share the different sort of opinions on food and food systems and food security. So this is my first time doing Instagram. So I did one myself, just talking about the idea of linking all the Mediterranean climate zones together across the world. And then the idea is that this will be showcased in the Italian pavilion at COP. So that's been a fun project, and I've been learning a lot about COP, but also about Instagram and just how to do a live, which was a new thing for me. It's a lot of new tools. And so I appreciate, Frank, your portal in, because I think there's so many ways to participate in COP without having to go.
Yeah, thanks for that, Eric. Yeah, actually, I'm going to be experimenting with this COP, how to get jet lag without even leaving home. Because I actually am credentialed as an observer, but I'm part of that growing number of folks who are virtual observers. So observing from home, and which will be kind of interesting given the fact that it's totally flip day. So, one thing that I am going to be looking for, and I would appreciate folks keeping their ear to the ground on it, is trying to connect up with folks who are going, who are going to be involved in various constituency meetings. And hopefully some of those constituency meetings will choose to have a a Zoom element to them. So definitely, definitely, if you hear of anything along those lines, let me know.
And Gina, you might know her, or Don. There's a WhatsApp kind of group that maybe, I don't know if you're part of that, Frank or Gina or Don, but it's an on the ground, it's sort of set up for people that are going, but it's been really informative because there's a lot of good links and posts about the process of going, but also just sort of about COP. And I don't know, I think it's a good way to stay in touch, and I don't know if there's going to be something similar through WhatsApp for, when it's going, for folks to just sort of see what's going on without being there. But it's a great communication tool.
Yeah, I was in the group. Well, I am in the group that was created last year for it's for the US ACE delegation. But they were talking about creating a new group for this year. It is really, really helpful actually. So I'll put the link in the chat. It'll just take me a minute, but that's a good idea, Eric, actually, because there's a lot of good conversations that happen on this.
Yeah, I was actually involved in the ACE and a couple of other WhatsApp groups for other constituencies, and on the one side of it is can be confusing because of, for me, social media is confusing. I tend to be kind of old school in some of in my digital connections, but on the other hand, it was, given how chaotic COP26 was, it was invaluable just in being able to figure out what was happening when, because the UNFCCC wasn't keeping up with everything that was happening. Yeah.
Does anyone know? Oh, I was going to ask, does anyone know what some of the major themes are expected to be this year? Like, I know last year there was a big push to come to an agreement about ending deforestation and some other things. And I don't know how much that organically grew out of the meeting or if that was a focus that was decided ahead of time, but does anyone know?
Loss and damage is the big one that's on the docket right now. At least it's emerging. Now, whether or not the developed countries are just going to kick it down the road again like they have for a couple of decades now is another question. But it's and actually, if you go to the COP presidency's page, there is actually days by theme. And then the other thing that is worth looking at is World Resources Institute. They have, I think I put a link to this on the online engagement, the third page of the portal. But they have a, what is it? They have a webinar that they've done, or no, I'm sorry, a web page that they've done in terms of the major themes of the COP. So there's actually quite a bit out there just in terms of what's the hot items on the table this year. Yeah, I don't know if anybody's been following it, but Care About Climate has had a webinar that they've been doing that's oriented towards youth delegates to the COP. But one of the things that's interesting is they actually have it's a webinar series, almost like a whole course. And it's one of two, because Second Nature is doing one like it. It's a little bit higher level. Those are really worth looking at. I've been involved with both of them, and the one by Care About Climate actually has a video that they've done in terms of engaging remotely. They're really beginning to think in those terms.
So I had a quick question for those of you who are familiar with COP and the resources involved. I'm putting together an educational resource set for a conference happening in December. And what I'm having trouble with is that it seems like I can find COP26, I can find COP27. They're not particularly connected through a single hub either, but this would be for COP28. Is there a place that isn't just for an individual COP, but a more general hub that connects the dots so that you don't have to jump between each year?
Yeah, go to UNFCCC's website. And actually, if you go on the second page of the portal, there's a series of foldouts in terms of questions about the COP. And I give direct links over to some of their more general information pages.
I know I did a little bit of, I was curious about future COPs and where they're going to be, and and I'm not sure this is still tentative, but it looked like next year might be in Dubai, and then so what would that be? COP 2028, and then COP 29 would be potentially in Australia, was being explored. But again, that those may be tentative. It was just some preliminary kind of looking around.
Sense is Dubai is pretty much confirmed.
Does anybody know if anyone from sort of directly from the Clean Network is going to be? Well, I know like Haley Krim's going, and Deb Morrison will be there. Not sure about others though.
I think, yeah, it's just been, Haley's going. I think Kristen from Climate Generation is going. I'm not sure who else. I don't think Frank Neapol isn't going this year. So I think that's it. I think it's a smaller group from Clean this year. Haley's leaving, I know, in a few days. So she will be there, but kind of a smaller group this year. I know it's been really, really hard to get the visa thing figured out. It's just been a really hard time for people trying to figure out the travel logistics for this location in particular. It's been very difficult, which kind of stinks. But I've been seeing a lot of messages from people who can't get their visas figured out. Flights are really confusing, and safety and lots of stuff. So I think this is a hard one for folks.
I got a message from Don that he's been having some computer issues. Don, I don't know if you still are, but
They seem better,
okay.
but my computer has been quirky the last few days. So if I disappear, I will restart and be back. One non-COP related announcement that I forgot to make earlier is James D'Amico's book, How to Confront Climate Denial, Literacy, Social Studies, and Climate Change, just came out a couple of weeks ago. And he's going to do a educator session for us on Tuesday, December 13th at 7 o'clock. We don't have all the details out yet, but when we have that figured out, I'll put it out on the list.
What do you,
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, one of the things I'm curious about this COP is just how different the world situation is this year compared to last year with the war in Ukraine and the impact on energy worldwide, and with the US passing the Inflation Reduction Act, but then, still political instability in the US, and who knows, whether that'll be overturned in a few years if a different party gets in. And I'd just be really curious to see how that environment sort of contributes to what happens at this COP and the mood.
That's a very good question. And Italy electing a fascist and all kinds of turmoil that scares the hell out of me.
Well, one thing though, it seems like every COP comes with its background beforehand. I mean, Paris was I think it was a couple of months before that, having a mass shooting. And then, and last year was COVID, and I don't think there's ever been a COP we've walked into that was the perfect moment.
Yeah.
I mean, I recognize the US really doesn't have much of a high ground here, but just like, does anyone else cringe a little at the thought of Dubai holding a climate change conference? Like, their entire economy is based on like hyper consumption tourism and fossil fuel extraction. I don't know, glass houses, I suppose.
I hadn't thought about that, but it is a great point. And I'm sure you're probably not the only person that feels that way. It's a great point.
That was the first thing that crossed my mind when I heard Dubai.
Yeah, when we were leaving Scotland last year and it was announced that it was in Egypt, both my wife and I made the decision we're not going. I mean, this is just, it doesn't work. But in terms of what happens with Dubai, if we wind the clock back to COP24, that was in Katowice. 8 coal mines, either still active or shut down within the city limits. And there was a lot of feeling that that was just a really bad place to do it. But in some respects, when you're talking about things like just transition, it was a damn good place to do it.
Yeah, and I do think that Dubai recognizes the truth stated by Saudi oil minister in the 1970s, I think, that the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's also the slave labor for me. That's also
Yeah. Oh yeah.
a big one.
Yeah.
There's also the thing, I don't know, like the value, I've been sort of toying with this, wrestling with this too, the idea of, a lot of folks will knock the idea of traveling, spending all that carbon to go, right, to a place where we're trying to not burn carbon, but there's so much value added when you bring people together, right? When you have those, just the difference between doing in-person teacher workshops for me and virtual ones has been, it's much more dynamic, right? And there's never going to be a perfect location, right? Because everyone's going to have to fly or get there somehow. So there's that side of it. But then, it just speaks to Frank, the virtual attendance and really amplifying that. So I don't know, I've just been thinking about that a lot. Like, and then the other piece that I may have brought up in a earlier call was, it's a UN sponsored event, and the UN itself is maybe, there's a lot of it, just like within our country, uplifting all voices and really getting people to the table. The UN is, and the uplifting the global South, right, and bringing the global South voice into the conversation is big, and even within that ACE WhatsApp conversation, there's been asks for global South members to sort of be sponsored, to be given housing, to and sort of supporting them, which I think is awesome. But the UN itself is just not structured equitably in my mind. You've got the 5 major security council folks, and there's nobody from the global South represented. The second most populated country, India, is not at the table. So there's just the UN itself kind of needs like a 2.0 or a real sort of a look at itself, I think, because if the system's not is structured in a way that's not inclusive and representative,
then no amount of individual action is going to overcome that.
Yeah, how do you and that's a huge lift to think about changing something like the UN, right? It's just like the idea of changing the way our Senate works. Is it outdated the way the Senate is designed in our country? But I don't know.
One of the charming things to me about UNFCCC decision making is that the decisions are made by consensus. And if you think about this, I mean, probably one of the most, quote, democratic, unquote, procedures you can use. And all of this is happening with countries that range in political styles from socialist democracies to out and out dictatorships. And so it's weird. It's weird. But I do agree with you, Eric, in terms of the contact is one of the things I know I'm going to miss this year, is just being able to bump into people waiting in line for coffee and having conversations and all of the impromptu stuff that can happen. It's really hard to do within a virtual situation, which is one of the reasons why more and more, I think, if you're going to look at a broader participation in all of this, which is necessary, you're going to have to do it virtually to some degree, but maybe it's not virtually per se, it's hybrid. You've got clusters of people in connection, in networking with each other. Because I mean, that's a beautiful part about the civil society side, is just bumping heads with people and learning what other people in other parts of the world are doing and what they're, and incredible conversations. We just somehow have to figure out how to do that in a COVID type Zoom world.
Yeah, and I have many thoughts on these issues. I think mostly online meetings haven't really tried to fill in the surreptitious meetings and the in-between session discussions. And I think if we try, we might actually have some success if we continue to mostly not try. And I think actually the Excel's meeting that Clean sponsored last month did some of that, and I thought it worked pretty well. But GSA, last week or 2 weeks ago or whenever that was, the technology worked really well. But man, did I miss the opportunity to follow up with speakers after the session. And I did send an email to one of those folks that I really wanted to follow up with, but others I did not, whereas I would have, snagged them and talked to them afterwards. But I do think that if we make an effort to do that, we might have some success. And maybe that's a role that Clean can play, is having some kind of in between sessions social platform or something. I don't know if we're going to pull that together for this COP, but maybe next COP.
Yeah, I know, like, one of the big attractions for me, and just piggybacking on what you were saying, Don, I agree. Like, I think if we try at it, there's a lot of solutions for that. The sort of The speed dating concept of just, meeting a few folks in a small room, having quick conversations, the slides, Gina, that you had for Excels were really useful. I just had a good conversation with Billy Spitzer from the Hitchcock Institute back in Amherst as a result of that, as a result of us sort of connecting on the slides and just kind of having those quick breakout rooms. Yeah, I mean, one of the big attractions for me with COP is the international nature of it, right? And I was looking forward to the idea of meeting people, especially from these other Mediterranean climate zones, and just kind of sharing ideas and maybe building a collaboration. But then I think of groups like the Climate Reality Project, which is all over the world and has a huge, group of folks that have been trained in that. And it's just a matter of like leveraging groups like that, that already have an international presence. And like you were saying, Frank, at the last one, had all these kind of side events and small scale things going on throughout Glasgow and other places. So I think where there's a will, there's a way, and COP is definitely one awesome opportunity to bring folks together, but it's not the only, and I like that idea too of satellite, events and, just the way that Jim and Frank and I all met together and did a clean call, right? You can imagine that happening, a cluster of folks that are in a local area, kind of grouping together and then, sort of attending or being part of the larger COP effort, for example.
Well, let me put something on the table here because I'm getting close to something that I really have wanted to do for a long time. So we've got some folks that are part of the Clean Network going to the COP. And then some of us are doing it virtually. And there's been a lot of expression here about different ways of being able to interact from where we are. I mean, having those waiting in the line coffees or waiting in the line chats over coffee or what have you. I'm wondering, possible future topic for an informal discussion would be getting those of us who've had some experience in the COPs together with everybody else and having some discussion about what would it look like to really be able to do something that is bringing what's happening at the COPs to the rest of us. I mean, I obviously have a lot invested in that idea, but I would love to have a conversation with the rest of you about that.
Yeah, I mean, so is this something that you would think ideally happen after COP, Frank?
I think so. Because I think what we'd want to do is put out a particular invite to Deb and Kristen and Jan's been to 26, Haley, and having them join us. But I think definitely after the COP, because among other things, there's not the bandwidth during the COP.
Oh yeah,
kind of
totally.
discussion.
Well, so I will say next week, and I'm glad we were talking about this so that I can remind people. Next week, no, the following week after next week. So I'm looking at November 8th, 2 weeks from today. Kristen from Climate Generation is going to have her delegates come and talk about their experiences at COP. So that is happening November 8th. And then we actually have the remainder of the year filled out in terms of calls, but in January, you could do something like that. Starting at the beginning of January, we have plenty of openings where we could do something like that.
And I think actually waiting till January would be good because it'll give folks who've been there or folks who've been participating remotely a chance to really digest what's been going on, because your brain gets really scrambled in these events.
Oh yeah. So you're saying Team members that Haley, Deb, Kristen, Haley. I'm trying to think about who else. I think I'm gonna do it. Yeah, anytime in January, really, you could do something like
Okay.
that.
Okay. Well, what I could do is I could reach out to the people I mentioned and see if there's
Yeah.
interest on their part of just having some sort of
Yeah,
panel discussion and an informal chat. I don't know.
that would be great. I would be, yeah, happy to put that on the schedule if
Okay,
you wanted to do that.
cool.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like the COP side of it, like you're asking for, Frank. I was thinking about the climate generation too, Gina, because I know that they're kind of really trying to make an effort to make it accessible and sort of live, some live presence. They're there and there, but they're aware of us in the virtual world. And then thinking about these kind of hybrid meetings, I think we've probably all been in them recently, where you have somebody that can't make it, so there's a computer sitting on the desk and that represents them. Or what I've seen recently is these large scale touchscreens, where you can have kind of that in the room, and the facilitator that can kind of give a bigger, you're not looking at one person's desktop, but you're looking at the virtual participants within the room where the live event is happening. So I think there's definitely some interesting, strategies for bringing folks together like that in that kind of environment. And maybe that could be a piece of that exploration, if that's not too much to tackle in one clean call, or maybe that's something different. Maybe that's just this idea of kind of what you're saying, Don, about, how do we create a real inclusive hybrid event that's meaningful.
Face it, we just need a good holodeck.
That's right. Katie, have you gone to COP before?
No, I haven't. I've never had the opportunity. It's, I guess it's something like some of you, Eric, you're kind of, have tried to go on your own before. I could try to do something like that, but I've just, it's such a busy time of year for me, and, just the resources to get there and everything like that can be challenging. So I haven't taken that leap to try to do it on my own before. And yeah, we haven't really had opportunities in our group to be able to do that through our work. Unfortunately, I'd love to someday, but hence why I like to follow all the COP discussions through Clean here, though.
Yeah, and I really have tried to cut down on my travel, and I can't afford it. either.
Exactly, Don. Yeah.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like, right after COP, you get into it's, holidays. You have Thanksgiving, and then AGU, which is such a big conference for us, and then holidays, and then me personally, but other people in Clean too. I know AMS is a pretty, big conference, and I don't every year, but I try to go to that one as much as I can, and so that's in early January. So it's just like it makes for such a busy time. It's like almost 3 months there. That's just full of like, being traveling basically, or being off of work for family or whatever.
Yeah, and I'll note that I haven't gotten on an airplane in 2022, and I have not. Oh no, that's not true. I've taken one trip to NSTA in April, and life is better without airplanes and airports, especially for large people.
bad enough as a small person. So I 100% agree with you, Don. I just did some personal travel this summer for various family things. And this time I took a baby with me. So I definitely agree with you. I was saying to Jeremiah, like, because we're planning to go back for Christmas too. And, we thought about trying to drive to Seattle, but it's like 20 hours and I'm not going to do that with a 1-year-old in the car. We've driven it before, but it's just such a big burden compared to flying. And now, especially with the kid. But I just said to him, I was like, gosh, if there was a train that did that, like how awesome that would be, be so much nicer, but it'd still be like a full day or a couple days, but I just so much prefer that than the plane. But with the train, she could get up and move around versus the car, she's just stuck in the car seat the whole time, so I just wish we had more public transit and trains in this country.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And I'll note, this is off topic, but it's on the topic we're kind of on, that I took a little vacation week and a half ago where went to a friend's vacation home on the Outer Banks with a total of 4 couples. And my girlfriend and I were the 2 to return without COVID. And we carpooled down with another couple. And so 11 hours in the car with KN95 masks on and the windows cracked. And we managed to not get COVID with 2 people who were testing positive. So wear those masks.
Masks and ventilation, that's the biggest thing they say, yeah.
Yep.
One thing about traveling to the COPs that's always interesting, wife and I are both retired, so that's how we can swing it time-wise. And once in a while I get somebody to pay for it, but most of the time we pay for it. But we've always tended to go about 3 weeks ahead of the COP. And because one of the wonderful things about that is I always have problems with dropping into an area to go to a conference and having no context of where the blazes I am. And it's we've always done the traveling with Airbnbs, not hotels. And so we get a chance to actually live with people and go out and shop and market and things of that sort. And that in and of itself makes it worthwhile. Plus you get a sense of how the people living in the country feel about this big event that's supposed to be happening in their country. And that was a problem with Egypt. That just wasn't possible.
Well, you said the next one's in Dubai, is that what somebody said?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting because maybe it might feel safer, but I think they have a lot of human rights issues with like making it seem like it's a nice place, but actually there's a lot of inequity and almost like slave labor level kind of stuff going on there, isn't there? That's what I read anyway.
There's no almost about it. They get a ton of workers from like India and the Philippines, and their employers will basically just like confiscate their passports, and they have no ability to, they have no ability to leave the job, and they'll be deported. And it's because I remember there were a lot of, oh God, I don't even freaking remember if it happened like the last time has stopped meaning what it used to mean in the last few years, but there's a big to-do because they planned like the soccer World Cup FIFA thing in Dubai, and I remember them having a lot of these discussions about it. But I don't know, was that supposed to be 2020? Did that happen? I don't even know, honestly. But yeah,
It's in Qatar this year, also in November, so there's some similar concerns.
Yeah, I remember that because Carolyn, there was a lot of concerns about the human rights aspect, but also talk about climate change stuff. I think there was also concerns about the fact that they were basically trying to air condition outdoor stadiums because it's so hot there.
I don't even, I'm just gonna let other people talk because my brain's a little bit broken trying to comprehend that one.
Other COP thoughts? If there aren't other COP thoughts, I have been wrestling with Jevons paradox, and I wonder if anybody has good readings on Jevons paradox, which is the idea that when a technology becomes more energy efficient, we use more of the technology. So the advantages of the efficiency are sometimes lost, often lost. And if anybody knows good readings or places to go for that, I'd be interested in hearing that. It is not a simple universal thing. Sometimes Jevons paradox seems to be true and sometimes not. And I want
I
to.
think it is addressed in the climate interactive model from MIT.
Mhm.
So if you like go through sort of their like video trainings and readings, I believe they do address that, perhaps not in as much detail as you might like, but I bet you they would have like a bibliography with good resources.
Cool, thanks. And I'll put in a good video that came to my attention yesterday. That's just a 4-minute short explainer for folks who haven't heard of it. I'll find that in just.
I haven't heard of that either, but I totally can see. I mean, like you said, no, I mean, what law is sort of universal, or theory out there is universal, but I've read about and thought about that idea. For me, that really resonates with air conditioning and how we're starting to use so much more air conditioning, and we need it in more places that are having more of these, extreme heats and heat waves and things like that. And as it is more efficient and cheaper, more people get it. But then, yeah, we can't just have everybody air conditioned. It's not that efficient, right? And so the more people use it, the more we have climate change, the more we need it, or some people need it, but then the more we use air conditioning, the worse it is for climate change. It's just kind of that vicious cycle or whatever. Like that's been something I've been thinking about lately, or that I read an article about recently.
Yeah, here in Portland, that plays out with the housing market, because we live in a neighborhood that has a fair number of modest, like our house was built in 1929. It's about 1,200 square feet or something like that. And a lot of these houses are being leveled to build 3,000, 4,000 square foot houses. And it was interesting because there was a 1,200 square foot house. Oh, and the argument that's being used is these new houses are more energy efficient because they're being built to current building codes. And did some numbers on a 1,200 square foot house that was replaced with a 3,000 square foot house. And they were just about the same. The heating load was just about the same, even though the one didn't have insulation in the window, in the walls.
Yeah, so there's the link for that. Nice. It's like a 4-minute YouTube video. Give you a good introduction to the concept. Yeah, and it's interesting too that when you shop for refrigerators, sometimes bigger ones use less electricity than smaller ones.
They just posted in that ACE WhatsApp thing, this thing about Egypt shutting down spaces on the first day of COP. So I do think there's going to be some real travel and security issues with this one, like folks are talking about. Not going to be easy. I just hope that everyone, it's safe for folks there. It sounds like kind of around the logistics, like just to piggyback to what you were saying, Frank, I'm like a firm believer of if you're going to go somewhere that far, understand the area that you're in and enjoy it and the context. Like I think that's really important. And a lot of people are talking about going through Cairo and then going to Sharm because it was cheaper to get a short flight between Cairo and Sharm. And then maybe folks were going to be also a lot of people going to Sharm el Sheikh, or probably the 99% are going to COP. So that, the safety once you get there is probably pretty decent, but yeah. So there's always the international, whatever's happening, like you all were saying. The circumstances of the moment.
Now we're coming up on the end of the hour. Are there other things we want to touch base on?
Want to say thanks, Tom, for facilitating.
Well, if folks don't have anything else, maybe we can call it a wrap 6 minutes early.
I don't mind getting 5 extra minutes back in my day.
All right, thanks
Well,
all.
it's a coffee cup. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Don, for facilitating.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you all.
Thanks,
Yep.
everyone.
Cheers.